Brees. So let's knock it around a bit with Mike Triplett, who's good enough to join us now on Twitter at Mike Triplett. How are you, man?
Good. How you doing?
Doing well. Appreciate the time as always. Let me start with what I think is probably what needs to be the first domino to fall that will set off the chain reaction for everything else, and that's Drew Brees. I saw the Pro Football Talk report where it's not just idle chatter that Drew is really considering retiring. Do you believe Drew Brees will play next year?
If I had to guess, I would guess yes, but I don't think Brees has necessarily even made up his mind, and I certainly don't feel definitive about it. I mean, maybe I feel 60-40 that way. And I genuinely believe him. I mean, this guy is such a process-driven guy that he has said for 3 years in a row now, I want to get through the Super Bowl and all the obligations and all his appearances, and then I want to take a month and I want to turn everything off and decompress and spend time with my family and talk to my family, and then decide, in mid to late February when it's time to decide. And I think that's the process he will go through. Now, my initial reaction was he was playing so well down the stretch. I mean, his December was maybe the best month he's ever had as a quarterback in 19 years. Obviously, the playoff loss was a disappointing performance, but that's a reason why I would be surprised if he retired too, to go out on such a sour note. So for those reasons, how well he's still playing, the fact that this team has a chance to win a Super Bowl, my guess is, and plus, Tom Brady would pass all his records if he retires now. But it's entirely possible that he does retire, and I think he's going to give it, serious thought, like he says he's going to.
So let's operate under the assumption that Brees does return, which I'm assuming he will, and I may even say it's more than 60-40. But again, we'll all wait and see. What does that salary number look like in 2020 if he does return?
I wrote something right away after the season ended, and I just threw $30 million out there because that would be something like, I don't have it right in front of me, that would be something like the 7th or 8th highest paid quarterback in the league. That's about what he did 2 years ago when he signed for $25 million, when that made him about the 6th or 7th highest paid quarterback in the league. A slight discount, and then his even bigger hometown discount that I don't think people appreciate enough is that he only gets 1 year of guaranteed salary at a time. Like he doesn't sign a 5-year deal with $80 million guaranteed so that if he's done playing, he's on the books for years and years to come. It would have just 1 year of guaranteed salary, but I wouldn't be surprised if he just keeps it at the same $25 million that it was before, or somewhere between 25, 30 million. I have a feeling he'll be somewhere between the 6th and 10th highest paid quarterback in the league on just basically a 1 year deal.
Mike, let's just keep it at that same $25 million.
Yeah, it's funny though. I had like a days long conversation with people on Twitter about this, and I was even like having a philosophical conversation, like with Mickey Loomis, where I was just asking about it. It's like, for fans, is it fair? It's, of course everybody wants Brees to do it because he's on the Saints and it would help the Saints. But would fans not be pissed if all of a sudden the Falcons announced that Matt Ryan is going to play for $10 million a year so they can spend an extra $20 million on players? Like,
so true.
What I'm saying is, like, do fans want this to be – like, what if Russell Wilson says, you know what, I'm in the prime of my career and I'm wasting all these opportunities. I am only going to make $10 million now. And the Seahawks go out and spend $25 million in free agency. Is this a trend that fans really want around the league, or do they hope only the Saints do this?
It's a phenomenal point. I guess we could have we could probably have an hour-long discussion just on that, but for the sake of time, we'll move along. So let's operate under the assumption, though, that Brees will play in 2020 at somewhere in the ballpark of the number that you suggest, that $25 million thereabouts. What does that do for the rest of the guys that you write about, that class of 2017 that are all going to be coming up after next season, with the exception of the first rounders, obviously, that they have the 5th-year option?
Right now, yeah, that's the thing. A lot of this will depend on contract holdouts. None of those guys has to get a new deal yet. They're all under contract. Kamara, Williams, Anzalone, and Hendrickson are heading into the final year of their deal. So think Michael Thomas last year, where the holdouts seemed inevitable, and it finally came at the start of training camp, and eventually, he got paid. Because look, Alvin Kamara is heading into the fourth year of his deal, and he's due to make $950,000 this
Crazy.
year, and he's probably worth, now his value I think is very hard to determine, but he's probably worth somewhere between $12 and $15 million. So I think that one is inevitable. I think Kamara is going to force the Saints to a decision this year. I think they're going to have to pay him long term. I don't know if we'll see that with Lattimore and Ramczyk. They're under team control for 2 more years, and those fifth-year options are like $10, $11 million for them. So they will get money next year, even though I think their market value is closer to $15 million. So I don't know if they're going to force the issue yet this offseason. And maybe the Saints will want to come to an agreement with them so they can move the cap money around. So those are all possible with all three of them. It would be tough, obviously, to pay them all at once. I don't know if the Saints can pull it off, but I always believe they can, because the Saints have proven over the years that they can manipulate the hell out of the salary cap. I mean, they created ghost years. They signed guys to 1-year deals, but they call them 4-year deals. And obviously they keep pushing this money into the future, but so far there's never been a real penalty to it. They have $25 million in ghost money from last year on this year's books, and they can push $25 million more to next year. I do think this is the ultimate test, though. I think it would be very hard to pay Brees and Bridgewater and Taysom Hill and Kamara and Lattimore and Ramczyk, in addition to the fact that Michael Thomas and Cameron Jordan are both making close to $20 million. I think we're finally seeing the ultimate test. I do think of it, though, you start at the top. You start with the guys you absolutely want to keep. You put a dollar figure on them, and you keep them if you want to. The guys who might fall by the wayside, we've talked about Andrews Pete a lot. He's a free agent this year. Von Bell, who I think they like, but they have a backup in Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Maybe those are the guys who they don't pay this year. But at some point, I do feel like we're going to reach a point where they can't pay everybody, but we really haven't seen that yet.
He's on Twitter at Mike Triplett. Read his stuff at ESPN.com. Really good piece right now. So if you had to prioritize the guys you just mentioned, I think we all kind of agree, Pete, it's unlikely he's back. The rest of the guys you just mentioned, is your assumption that they will all end up re-signing with the Saints?
I don't know for a fact. Here's the one thing that the Saints have done in the past is they put a dollar figure on a guy. They don't say we can't afford you, but they say we don't think you're worth this much. We saw that with Mark Ingram this last year.
Great point.
They could have paid Mark Ingram. They could have paid him $7 million. They could afford it if they wanted to. They paid Jared Cook $8 million. But their value on their number 2 running back was $4.5 million a year. Now they probably would have gone to 5 if they had known he was going to sign for 5.
Right.
That turned out to blow. But they weren't going to pay him 8. They knew that right away, and they moved on to Latavius Murray. Carl Nicks is another good example. They didn't lose Carl Nicks 7 years ago or whatever it was because they couldn't afford him. They didn't want to pay him $9 million. They didn't think that was a wise investment. So the question that pops into my mind, I feel like Ramczyk is a guy they're going to pay no matter what. I think Lattimore is probably a guy they'll pay no matter what because the cornerback market hasn't gone crazy yet. But I think Kamara's a really tricky one. Running back, what if he demands $15 million or even $13 million like Le'Veon Bell just got? I don't know. He only plays 75% of the snaps for them. That's a curious one. I'm fascinated to see how it goes. But on the flip side, he's been half of their offense for the last couple of years, and they already don't have enough playmakers. So I'll put that one at 60-40 too. I'll say 60% they do pay Kamara. And if they weren't going to pay him, I guess we'd be looking at a trade scenario. So we'll probably know by March if they're planning on paying him or not.
It's an interesting point. All right, last thing for you, Mike. Teddy Bridgewater, Taysom Hill, what happens?
I hear the reports, and especially when they come from Jay Glazer, you've got to believe them that Sean Payton has a vision for Taysom Hill as a franchise quarterback, and I would love to see it. I would love to watch Sean Payton game plan around Taysom Hill, and what the Bills are doing with Josh Allen, what the Ravens are doing with Lamar Jackson. It probably falls somewhere in between that. But my logical brain just can't get past the fact that Taysom Hill seems like a huge risk for a team that had 14 Pro Bowlers or All-Pros this year and is built to contend for a Super Bowl. it feels like a little bit of a gamble to me. We just saw Teddy Bridgewater go 5-0. Taysom, not only is he a little bit of an unknown as a quarterback, but he also had that injury history in college, and I've never seen him avoid a tackle yet in 3 years of covering him in the NFL. So I'd be stunned if they went into next year, if Brees retired, with Taysom only. But if Brees retired, I think they could afford both Teddy and Taysom and expand more of this, maybe be, 85% or 80% Teddy, 20% Taysom. I don't think they'd be afraid to do that. So I'd be really stunned if they went into next year without Brees or Bridgewater, though.